Good afternoon or good morning from wherever you're watching, and welcome to our latest webinar, Demystifying the Dark Web. Thank you all for joining us. I hope everyone is safe and in good health and remaining sane in these strange times. Over the course of the next hour, we'll hopefully give you something to think about as we explore this intriguing threat and the hidden, murky underbelly of the internet. Perhaps some of you are already dark web specialists, but others I'm sure know the onion only as a humble vegetable that you've perhaps somewhat privately been stockpiling bags of in your kitchen cupboards. Today, we'll explore how criminal gangs may be stealing both your company data and that of your customers to create fake profiles on the dark web and use these to set up illicit businesses, profiting from the sale of drugs, all sorts of heinous crimes, and even murder. Is your business or are you individually exposed to this threat? Here to answer these important questions, we have none other than Professor Richard Benham, the world's first formal professor of cybersecurity management, and best known both as a celebrated author and for creating the National MBA in cybersecurity with the support of the Prime Minister back in 2014. This webinar is brought to you in partnership with Acuris, a trusted and independent provider of data intelligence for anti-money laundering, anti-corruption and cybersecurity professionals. And so I would also like to introduce you to Nick Parfitt, Head of Market Planning at Acuris, who will be moderating the discussions with us today. My name is Dickon Johnston. I'm the CEO of Themis, a risk management and technology firm specializing in financial crime. As well as our core advisory, technology and outsourcing services, much of our work is focused on threat-based insight and intelligence through our think tank. And we're very proud to be partnering with Acuris and with Professor Benham to bring you this introduction to the dark web. A few brief health and safety tips before I start, if I may. All of the presenters and panelists today are observing social distancing, and so we're all at least 75 miles apart and therefore somewhat reliant on our local broadband providers. If in a worst case scenario, this means our internet falls over, we do have a backup recording, so please just bear with us. We also have, let me just have a look, 123 of you wonderful guests on this webinar so far, so we'll try and make this session as interactive as possible. Professor Benham will start with a short talk, but we'll intersperse this with audience polls, so please be ready and waiting with your fingers on the buzzer. Please also ask as many questions as you would like. Nick will be able to see them coming through from the back end, and he'll ask as many of them out loud as we have time for. I do hope you enjoy this webinar, and so without further ado, Richard, what is all this talk about onions and the dark web, and should we be concerned?
Good morning, good afternoon and good evening to everybody. I'm talking to you today from Cheltenham, which is the UK's head of cybersecurity, or one of them, partly because we have GCHQ down the road. In terms of broadband provision, you would have thought that would have made us possibly the quickest and probably the best broadband area in the country. Alas, they obviously seem to take an awful lot. But I'm confident this afternoon that we will hold up, and over the next 20 minutes, I shall be talking to you about the dark web, some of my experiences on it, and giving you a slightly different angle on it that I hope will help you to take away some things that you need to think about, but more importantly, things that will make both your organizations and yourselves safer. To kick matters off, there's a figure that I use on many presentations when I talk about the dark web, and it's 37. And this number 37 has come around because of two main things. 37 billion pounds, that's a lot of money, and particularly in these times when we're talking about billions of pounds being sent or being spent to help us through the latest crisis. 37 billion pounds is the hard financial cost to the UK economy of serious and organised crime. And why is that figure important? Because organised crime can only exist if there's vehicles to allow it to exist. With banknotes no longer the main means of payment, the use of banks, the use of digital currencies, the use of electronics and technology to transfer funds, has meant that the cyber world and the dark web, which we shall talk about, has taken on a greater prominence. Back in 2018, 37% of all crimes reported to action fraud, and action fraud only take a fraction of the actual criminal activities that take place. 37% of them were relating to the hacking of social media and email abuse. Many of you will have seen phishing attacks, both in a personal capacity and in a business capacity, and we'll talk about those later as well. I work very closely with the National Crime Agency. This is a major priority for them at the moment, to sort of reduce the amount of serious and organised crime, and combating what goes on in the dark web is a key way of achieving that. How big a problem is this? Just to give you an example, back in 2014-2015, Alphabay, which is like the eBay for criminals, started trading on the dark web. It's fair to say, and the figures that I put up on the slide, whilst we estimate it's about £1 billion that's been traded on Alphabay each year, the figures cumulative amount to billions and billions. To give you an example of the impact of this, the number of Bitcoin transactions that went through just that one site were over 3 million during that period of time. That's a lot of transactions, that's a lot of trading that's going on. What did Alphabay sell? It sold everything. It sold everything from guns to images to absolutely anything that anybody wanted that they couldn't get in the real world legally. Drugs played a major part in these figures as well. Alphabay wasn't in isolation. There were two other well-known brands that came up, Valhalla and Wall Street. Again, the reason I show you these is because the marketing logos on the right are very distinctive, and this plays a really important part in making any trading that goes on the dark web legitimate. But more about that later. What I'd like to do is just talk about today and where we find ourselves today. Why is the dark web so important to us? Well, certainly in these current times when we're working from home. As cyber criminals, I can guarantee you now they are working flat out morning, noon and night, 24/7 to exploit every opportunity of everybody working from home. Anyone that's identified as bank staff or anyone who has access to financial information is seen as a target. And you will have seen recently, and certainly you will see over the coming weeks and months, the number of attempts to try and get you to click on links within text or emails will only increase. So please be alert to that. The other bit that we're seeing is that on the dark web, the sale of drugs is going through the roof as well. A lot of people, a lot of innocent people, normal people are being tempted to go on the dark web to try and get some drugs, particularly around drugs that claim to be able to cure COVID-19. The good example of that is the malaria drug that exists at the moment, and the number of searches for that have also gone through the roof. We'll talk about why this is not a good place to be, but before we do that, I'd like to go to a poll, and I'd like to ask you, and I want you to be candid with me if you would, how many of you have actually been on the dark web?
Richard,
Nick,
yes,
can you just take us through the poll?
Absolutely. We'll just give everybody a few minutes to vote. And I thought just pick up on a couple of things that you were talking about before, Richard, and around that figure of 37% of fraudulent transactions, and also the cost of it, 37 billion. Do you see those figures increasing over time? And if so, when do you think they'll start to plateau and hopefully reduce?
So there are two answers to that. Those figures were from 2018, which are the latest available figures, because they came out in the National Crime Agency 2019 report. Those figures have significantly increased since. There are some claims that they've almost doubled, but that would need to be validated. I think certainly on the number of crimes reported that have either a fraud or a cyber element, we know that last year that 54% of all reported crime in the United Kingdom was relating to cyber or some sort of data fraud. and that figure continues to grow. It's why the UK police are now putting a lot of their resources into combating cyber fraud, and why the future of policing is effectively going to end up digital. In answer to the other point you make about is it going to plateau, Nick, I can't see in the short term that it will, but at some point technology, the awareness of individuals must mean that it must plateau, but I don't think we're anywhere near that at the moment.
Right. Well, yeah, very interesting. Well, we've got 88% of people voted. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and and talking about having been on the dark web, I actually did install a Tor onion router quite a few years ago now on a home laptop. Had a quick sort of look into a couple of sites, but yeah, it was a very weird experience and not something I ever wanted to repeat again. So I uninstalled that software very quickly and haven't been back since. So I think, okay.
Did they arrest you for that, Nick?
No, and as far as I'm aware, I wasn't the victim of identity theft or any of these other, scams and what have you. But maybe that was because I really was only on it for less than a couple of minutes, sort of thing,
Yeah, they all claim that, Nick. They all claim that.
Okay, well, we've got 89%. I think I'll close the poll now and share the results. So 20% actually of people. So what do we say? There's about 130 odd people on the call. So 26 people or so have actually been on the dark web. 80% no. What do you interpret from that, Richard?
Well, that's typical, and I think some people are obviously very candid about whether they've actually been on the dark web or not, and I think that I think some people may or may not be telling the truth. I mean, I would normally expect it to see about 30 or 40%. Given the industry we work in as well, it is also very tempting sometimes to go onto the dark web. Having said that, in recent times it has become more and more difficult, and of course it is more and more. The dangers are more and more widely publicised, particularly around child pornography images and also the purchase of drugs. So, Nick, you're obviously one of those as well, aren't you? So I'm not quite sure what to make of that.
Yeah, maybe you should say how often do you use the dark web?
Indeed. Okay, so look, that's a really interesting stat, and I'll come back to that. For those of you that have been on the dark web, the following slides they will have greater understanding for you. For the rest of you, what I've tried to do is to obviously go through in a very simple way what the dark web actually is, why it exists, and also the dangers and obviously how you should navigate it if you're ever unfortunate enough to find yourself there. So within the World Wide Web, or the web, I think is the best way to describe it. The web is made up of three core parts. At the very top, and if you look at the illustration of the iceberg, at the very top is the World Wide Web. This is the search engines. This is the Googles, Yahoos. This is the World Wide Web that we all know and we all go on and access. A lot of the material on that is freely available. There isn't much illegal activity goes on there. Apart from the attempts to obviously send out spoof emails or set up bogus websites on the World Wide Web, but generally it tends to be a safe place to transact. Underneath that, about another 90% of the web is what's known as the deep web. Now, the deep web should not be confused with the term dark web. And all the deep web is, that's everything that's stored and transacted that doesn't need to be in the public domain. And a good example of that are our personal emails, company information, various databases that we hold that are securely held. And for that reason, most of the data on the web and most of the transactions exist within the dark web. And all of our businesses use the dark web to transact. The dark web right at the bottom is actually the bit where we're going to go today. you need a special browser to go on there. So you have to have a reason for going into the dark web, and that's very important. And particularly when, as working with the police, you have to have a valid reason for really going there, because we would be asking you the questions as to why you wanted to even go there in the first place. It is random. The search engines that are available in the dark web tend to be quite chaotic, and you normally have to ask for particular domain names to go on to. It is fair to say there's large-scale illegal activity going on there, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute. But the biggest benefit for criminals is that you can actually be on there and be totally anonymous, and nobody can know what you're up to. Now, in my previous life, I worked for the intelligence agencies, and when you're a spy or doing something like that, the dark web is a very good place to share intelligence information. Also for journalists and anyone who's looking for, obviously, freedom of information in repressive states. Again, it is somewhere where legitimately you could go to trade data or to put messages on. Apart from that, most of it, unfortunately, is not good stuff. So I've explained the difference between the deep and the dark web. I think that you know, the storage of data is very, very important, and the deep web is the area that is expanding the most. And I think for all of us, you're seeing cloud providers now providing huge databases and the ability to hold bits of information, and a lot of the information that exists within the deep web will be held by our cloud providers. So what's really bad about the dark web? This is the bit that the journalists always pick up. You'll see in the media. This is the bit that excites people. But there are three key areas for me of information, of product out there that can be used for bad things. The first is stolen information. Should your credit card ever be stolen? Should any personal information ever be stolen? This is the ready market for selling it. A great example of that is British Airways last year lost 300,000 credit card details. I think, and obviously the first one of those, as soon as they were stolen or lost, appeared on the dark web within 20 minutes, and there was an active market transacting on that data for a fair few months afterwards. Whatever stolen information you have, whatever data you have, credit cards are good, social security information is good, passports are good. You know, anything that has any value, there's a market here. People will pay from hundreds, thousands of pounds for a piece of sensitive information through to fractions of pence, but it all has value. The second big market is obviously illegal drugs and substances. I've included substances because everybody's aware that you can go on and buy illegal drugs, but substances, particular poisons, particular painkillers, tranquilizers that aren't available without prescription. We've seen people trading horse prescriptions because for humans it gives them it gives them a beneficial side effect. Whatever you want can be traded there also. And the bit of the police obviously put a lot of resource into are the disturbing and dangerous services such as child pornography image, the sale of body parts, counterfeit goods, particularly banknotes, guns for sale, and of course the facilitation of human trafficking. All of those are bad things that go on the dark web. We talked about the onion. Everyone keeps mentioning the onion. For those of you that haven't been on the dark web, the onion is effectively an analogy of the browser that was first set up to access the dark web. It's called Tor, the onion router, and it is in effect just a browser that allows you to go into the dark web. Why the analogy of an onion? An onion has layers, and so it is with this tool you have layers of encryption as you go down into the dark web. What does that mean? It means that you don't get caught when you go on there. So as a criminal, it's excellent. I can go on there, do all my bits and pieces, and I've got no risk of being caught. I mentioned earlier, journalists, spies, state censorship. You know, originally it was set up as a military vehicle for people to exchange intelligence. And the irony is that the US military still pays for this, even though most of it is involved in criminality. It is free to download as well. And even a Google search on Tor will bring it straight up for you. Not that I'm recommending that, of course. I have to just quickly talk about Bitcoin, because I mentioned right at the beginning, with 37 billion pounds worth of transactions that are going through, that the dark web enables the exchange of all these goods and services, but they have to be paid for in some way. Sometimes it's benefit in kind, but the introduction of cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin, has meant that the dark web now has validity as a marketplace to transact all of these things. The holding of Bitcoin, the transfer of Bitcoin remains anonymous as well. So again, we're almost creating the perfect environment for criminals to operate in. So back to another poll. What I'd be really interested to know is, have you been involved or been the victim of any credit card scam, or had your credit card details stolen at all? So I'll pass over to Nick for that.
Great, thank you, Richard. Okay, everybody should see the poll now, and people are actively voting, which is great. We did have a question from the audience. I did ask for a little bit more clarification, as the question said, what happened to blockchain? So I'm assuming that's really to do with Bitcoin and the extent that blockchain records everything. Therefore, is it does it not also ensure that there isn't anonymity? Richard, what would you say to that?
Yes, I mean, banks and big institutions, corporate institutions, are very keen to introduce blockchain into the whole banking financial sector. I work for SWIFT on this, the interbank people, particularly when they had their cyber experience, should we say. Blockchain is a big answer to this. I have to be honest, I'm not seeing the market move as quickly as I thought it would towards blockchain solutions to the securing of secure networks. And when it does, I'm sure that the criminals will find a way around it. But at the moment, that is definitely one of the answers, for sure.
Great. Yes, because
we'll also talk about. I'll also talk about peer-to-peer communication and sharing of databases, because of course you can put a blockchain in place, but if people have localized ecosystems for doing all of this, then of course that presents yet another challenge.
And another question's come in saying, how do I find out if my customer's data is on the dark web?
So there are many people that offer that service. So if you do go onto Google, a dark web search is possible. I would always recommend that you go with a trusted provider of that. There are many hackers, there are many very, very small companies who will offer you for a fee a search on the dark web. I would definitely recommend that you go to a reputable company. The police don't really offer this as a service unless you've got a specific crime that's been committed against you. And I know that Acuris, who are sponsoring us today, have a suitable product for that. But definitely go to a recommended name who can conduct a search on your behalf.
Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, so we've got about 85% have voted. I think I will close that now and share the results with everybody. So 59% have experienced identity or credit card fraud. In line with your expectations, Richard?
I thought it might be higher. I mean, I've experienced it a couple of times where something's just appeared on my current account. I mean, quite often, I don't know, sometimes I get Costa Coffee, or I get iPhones or Amazon with something with a few pence coming through, and I have absolutely no idea what it is. And there are criminals out there who will literally set up a fraud for a couple of pence every week on your account, on the basis that you won't be able to identify it. When you look at your bank statements, you just automatically think, well, I must have ordered something off my iPhone or something similar, or ordered something from Amazon. So the ethos of taking little and often seems to be a criminal trait that we're seeing more and more. But slightly lower than I would have thought. But for those of you that have had it, I think in the past banks have very much paid out against a recognised hack. The more ambiguous ones, of course, are where you've given over the card details in good faith to a criminal or a scamster, and obviously you've lost money. And unfortunately, more and more, particularly on the weak and the vulnerable, and those that and those that are more trusting, We see this as a faceless crime that the cyber criminals have no trouble in transacting. Again, it's one of the biggest areas the police have to deal with at the moment.
Yeah, and I think for looking at a Javelin strategy paper of 2018, they said, and this is US data, mind you, that there were 16.7 million victims of identity theft in 2018. So clearly this is a huge problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you can steal someone's identity and set up bogus accounts, it's a very, very easy way to make money without being caught. And we'll talk a bit about how we're going to do that later on.
Got one final question, if we can just squeeze one in, Richard, and that's the question is, why can't they just remove the dark web? Good question.
Yeah, so that's been tried on two occasions. There have been attempts to take the whole thing down. It's so ambiguous and it's so difficult to know what actually exists there that it's almost become impossible to remove. But there have been calls for that several times, but it is just so complicated and so complex. We're also seeing the movement away from the traditional internet as such to a series of localized networks and also peer-to-peer transfer, which is where you can transfer data, say, from one phone to another, one computer to another, without the need to go through any third party. So whilst the dark web in its current form may diminish, and we won't know that, it will evolve and use the technology that evolves to turn up in other places. And in some ways, it's going to be even harder to police when all of this is held on local databases and people are dealing with things locally.
Great, thank you, Richard.
Okay. In terms of risks, so obviously Nick's been on the dark web, and a few of you have been on the dark web, and I'm assuming that you emerged unscathed. But what we are seeing now is that just by going on the dark web, it is presenting a lot of risks to you and your businesses, and just the mere action of browsing can put you at risk. The first risk is that a lot of the sites on there have built into them automatically viruses or malware that the moment you go on, you use the Tor router to go through to a site, they will try and infect the device that you're using to access the dark web. The reason for that is if you're silly enough to go on there, they'll send something into your computer to try and extract all of your data. One of the things that we are seeing more and more is the hijacking of webcams. So by putting a little program or a little bug back into your machine that enables them to take control of your webcam. Two reasons for this. Firstly, it enables them to see what you're up to. It is a massive intrusion of privacy, but they're also looking for compromising information that they can use for blackmail purposes or embarrassment purposes, but also to see your bank statements, what's lying around. And it's very, very difficult to detect. Lots of people put a little plaster over their webcam camera, but like most of us, I simply sort of forget most of the time. The real risk to you, though, is if you do go on the dark web, is that law enforcement agencies across the world, from Interpol to Europol to the NCA in the UK, all have false sites set up, and they also have police officers in there posing as criminals to try and take down illegal activity. So you may go on there in all innocence, but you may actually get a visit from the police, and I don't think you necessarily want that. And I think the other thing that the police are saying now, law enforcement agencies are saying, is that accidentally clicking on something, accidentally going into a site, accidentally doing this is not really that much of a defense against being on the dark web in the first place. You have to have a legitimate reason to be on the dark web, in my opinion, to obviously justify why you're there in the first place. So how easy is it to build a capability on the dark web? Well, as police officers, they quite often set up false companies to trade to entice the criminals in, to sting them, to obviously find out who they are, bring it back into the real world and make suitable arrests. But if today we were all going to set up in business together, we can set up a business on the dark web. And all we need to do is we need to have a sort of mission statement. So I put it in business speak, and that is basically for us to all make money without being caught. In terms of what we need to go on the dark web, we've talked about the browser. The only other thing we'll need is a computer. We'll need possibly a little bit of encryption software, which we can download from Google. And we also need a fake bank account or some sort of cryptocurrency so that we can obviously transact on it. Where can we find all this information from? Well, if we Google anything to do with the dark web, so how to trade on the dark web, how to set up a cryptocurrency on the dark web, the sad fact is that everything is on our normal web to enable us to set up a business on the dark web. And again, in terms of law enforcement, I would like that personally all taken down, but unfortunately, the internet is a free place at the moment, and so this sort of information is available. Particularly with teenage children, again, we see with teenage boys, this is a real temptation for them. You know, they think that they can make money, they think that they can be anonymous, and they don't think necessarily about the risks. In terms of what we would trade on there, by legitimately setting ourselves up with a logo, you know, defining our services in something that's a bit more friendlier, such as data service, galleries, medications, or protection, we can sell a whole list of products and services. And the most traditional ones that are sold, and if we were going to set up a company today, all of us, I would look at 5 key areas possibly that we could trade in. The first one is obviously stolen information, stolen passwords and the like. Also the sale of company sensitive information in emails. I did some work for a major bank in the city where their CEO had unfortunately been sending emails everywhere, and of course they've been released onto the dark web and then obviously made it into the media as well. And there was a price attached to all of those as well. Of course, when it went public, the value of those emails went down. But as a business model, just being able to hack in or get hold of some sensitive information has a value. We've talked about illegal images, we've talked about the trading of drugs and weapons and poisons. So I've got a question for you. Out of those 5 categories, in your opinion, which one do you think is the most lucrative if we were to set up a business today?
Great, thank you, Richard. So we have a number of choices here for you guys to have a look at. You can see the poll is active, which is great. So I mean that's quite terrifying, Richard. So it's talking about how easy it is to set up these dark web businesses if you are of a mind to do that, and particularly when it's teenage boys who are the most at risk, if you like. What's the government's sort of stance on that at the moment around kind of education in this space?
So there's always a balance between the freedom of the internet and obviously educating people to do the right thing. We see it in many aspects of teenage behaviour. So when I've run seminars in schools and we talk to the teenagers and the young adults around this, they are tempted by the worst aspects of the internet just because they're teenage children. They also tend to have a risk profile that sort of means that they're just a little bit more reckless. They don't seem to think it's a problem sharing inappropriate images. They don't seem to think it has a problem sending a picture of their latest credit card to their friends. And education's the key to that, and there's a lot of investment going into obviously making our young people more aware. But will you ever stop teenagers from being teenagers? Probably not. I think longer term something more draconian will need to come in, but at the moment we do obviously run with this risk, both as society and also as parents.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I have an 11-year-old boy, and you start thinking, is it too young to really make them internet savvy and more aware of these of these challenges? I suspect he's probably come across it on YouTube anyway by now, but
I was going to say, I think at 11 he probably knows more than the rest of us, to be honest. They do seem to know every trick in the book. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah, scary stuff. Got a quick question here. Has the Tor browser been compromised so that criminals can be caught if they use it? Good question.
Well, there is this aspect of freedom of tool that it's been released as a piece of free software. It's a free browser that anyone can use. I think it's called open source code. It's an open source browser, and the police do use that to try and identify who's going on it. I can't obviously tell you how they do that, but it is part of the weaponry that people that go onto that can potentially be identified when they go onto the dark web. But it's very, very difficult because you have a legal reason for using it. It is not illegal to download it, and it's not illegal to use it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and share the results with everybody. So, the majority of people identified stolen identity, email passwords as being the most lucrative product or service. Trading of illegal images at 3%. Trading of weapons and poisons at 7%. How does that gel with your views, Richard?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I mean, my question didn't say didn't include at least risk, and I think in terms of lucrative, the implication is that you want the product that gives you the most money for the least risk. And you're absolutely right. I mean, holding bogus emails, holding compromised data, credit card details, even if you're caught, the amount of evidence that's needed to convict you on what is an anonymous data website means that any conviction that you get will be limited anyway. The other areas that you trade in, obviously the trading of drugs and illegal images, body parts, etc., hold much larger custodial sentences. So from that point of view, as our business, I would encourage us to go into the data, the sensitive data business. Very easy to get, very easy to set up, very easy to buy and sell. And even if we were to get caught, it's pretty hard to get a conviction on that. And of course, on our business here, Dark Web Ventures, we wouldn't necessarily discount any of the other stuff. What we would do is we would certainly pass on referrals. So if we came across or traded images, drugs, or had any arms inquiries that came into the site, we would just sell them on to third parties for a fee. So very much like a normal business. What we have seen more and more is CEOs of large corporations, particularly banks, sports stars, VIPs, MPs and the like. There's a lot of prospecting that goes on to try and find compromising data, particularly on social media of those categories. And of course, that has great value when traded on the dark web. The key for us is to get to market as fast as we can. New emails, new credit card details, new stolen information, new images have the greatest value when you've got exclusivity and you're putting them out to sale first. Having said that, even third or fourth hand down the line, they still have value. Why is this such a good business? Well, we don't pay tax because obviously it's all illegal, so there's one big benefit there. The other advantage, of course, is it's our risk of being caught. Policing costs associated with bringing any case to court on the dark web are huge and very timely, and also fraught with technical issues. It's fair to say that both the police and the criminal justice system are still trying to grapple with the legal meanings of an awful lot of things relating to cyber and digital fraud. The sheer speed of transactions, and when I worked in a bank, when I worked for Swift, the actual speed with which money stolen can transfer around the globe and be converted is mind-boggling. And it's just the cost of doing some sort of forensic investigation to go to see the money trail means that, again, a lot of it gets written off under a certain amount. Obviously, it's anonymous. The whole thing is geared to obviously be secret. And I mentioned P2P networks, that's peer-to-peer networks. Again, if we start to use local networks that don't involve the dark web, that go straight across, we almost create our own sort of mini dark webs. And that again means that we can stay one step ahead of the law enforcement agencies. It's truly terrifying, and for the police and law enforcement agencies, this is a real pressure point at the moment. So I've mentioned the police quite a lot, and they only do that because they seem to be looking at the dark web more and more and more. So I work closely with the National Crime Agency. And I've shared this presentation with them, and they asked me just to share with you as organizations the following 5 points that I put up there on the screen. And really, I think the need for online due diligence is probably the most important one. If you have a new customer, if you have a new member of staff, it should be just a standard practice that you do a dark web search, not to necessarily find out anything wrong, but it can be an indicator that the individual has either had problems in the past, or more importantly, that they're running a risk that your business is inheriting by taking them on. We see more and more corporate credit cards being stolen, and again, a dark web search on a corporate credit card, on an employee, on a passport number can be very, very helpful, and certainly reduces the aspects of fraud. For people traveling to the Far East as well, we see phones being emptied of data as they fly into certain airspaces. All of this makes your employees vulnerable. So a dark web search can help with that greatly. I think in this world of GDPR, most organizations now do cyber awareness training for all employees. The NCA are very keen for that, because the fight against the dark web will only come about if everybody's aware of what it is and what it means. So this presentation today, whilst many of you will have dealt with this and will be aware of the threats because of the sector we work in, for many people, they just need to be told. If you understand something, you can react to it. And I think in these current times, they asked me to add that working from home is generally less secure. Even if you have VPN, even if you have all sorts of stuff in your home, across your workforce, working from home is generally less secure, and you need to be aware from that. And the one big message they did want to say, if you ever want to use the dark web without a legal reason, please don't. So Nick, I think that one was for you. So if you ever have a reason to use it again, don't.
Never again, that's for sure.
Okay, we're going into 2 final polls here. The first one is, do you believe that the dark web represents a threat to you or your organization?
We probably should have started with that one, Richard, and then at the end of your presentation, seeing what the variation might have been. But did I hear you? Sorry, did I hear you quickly skip over and say that mobile phone data can be stolen in mid-flight going over certain territories?
Yeah, so I wasn't going to name certain countries, but it's quite well known that if you go on a business trip and you fly over certain countries, there are mechanisms to empty your phones or any laptops that you have of the information you have.
Good God, I wasn't aware of that.
No, it's been widely aware for quite a few years. So particularly if you go over into the Far East, because that's so quite often you'll be given a blank phone or something if you go on a business trip over there.
Wow. Okay, I've got a question here from the audience saying, as we move into a 5G environment, does the dark web become more of an issue and something that will be less likely to identify the culprits and catch the culprits?
That's a really good question. I mean, looking at the capability of 5G, I mean, I can't even get 4G. I'm very strongly around prime. I think that it's like anything. 5G enables us to hold bigger amounts of data and transfer things quicker. There's a point at which it just can't get any quicker, or the benefit becomes redundant. I think the dark web will be a serious threat for the next 3 to 4 years, irrespective of 5G, because I think all of the infrastructure and everything and the behaviours that surround 5G just haven't caught up yet. So for me, 5G is going to make the dark web easier, quicker to access, but I think the threats stay the same.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll share the results then with everybody here. 87% of you do think the dark web represents a threat to your organisation. I'd love to hear the 13% who don't think it's a threat.
Yes, I was going to say, I haven't been able to convince the other 13%. I must try better next time then. I'll have to introduce some more scary stuff.
This also gels with a question from the audience as well. I think we've got time to ask this one. Should firms be more worried about their corporate data being stolen or their customers' data?
Good question. I think they should be concerned with both. I think if you lose customer data, there are GDPR implications. So there's a huge business fine. So as a business risk, that represents a bigger threat than just losing, say, internal data. It really depends how you lose it, who gets hold of it, and really what they do with it. But both are pretty much deadly, I would suggest, on both accounts.
Great. Well, we've got more questions coming through, but I think we'll crack on in the interest of time, Richard, and hopefully we can get around to answering some of these questions later.
So we have one last survey to finish up with before I finish, and that is, and this is more, this is looking to the future. Do you believe that your biggest security weakness in your organization, is it driven by technology or is it driven by people?
Okay, so the poll is now open, and that actually gels quite nicely with one of the questions here, which is, sorry, just scrolling down to it. What can a CEO do to stop their own profiles being targeted? Are leaders disproportionately targeted?
They are disproportionately targeted. In every board I go into, the CEOs and the board don't think that normal hygiene cyber rules apply to them. Quite often they give their PA their password, and somehow they think that in an organization they're immune. So most of the breaches and the high value ones we actually find at the top of organizations more than at the bottom. So there's definitely an awareness piece. There's obviously a knowledge piece that needs to happen there. But as a CEO, unfortunately, you will be targeted both for blackmail purposes, but also for the information that you're likely to hold on your devices anyway. Now, how can you defend yourself against that? You just need to be more aware of the risks that you carry. Encrypt your data, you know, or encrypt all of the data of your board for that reason. And I think, you know, just being very sensible like that, finding ways of just keeping things confidential. If you understand the risk, you can manage the risk. What I find with lots of CEOs and board members is that they just don't understand the real risk.
And so that's also an interesting question about working from home as well. I mean, there's no point having, you know, all your security in the office and phones and everything else when the CEO comes home and logs onto his, you know, £100 router at home, which is generally pretty weak. Do you see that being a concern?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing is obviously emailing confidential information from your business email to your personal email and opening it up on your personal devices. I mean, I have to hold my hands up. Years ago, that was the only way we could transfer presentations or bits to go home, to work on it from home, you know, for our meeting the next day. But, you know, the world's moved on in the last sort of 10, 12 years since we used to do that. And it's very much a danger. A lot of people have work devices that they work from home on. You know, the use of VPNs and the use of passwords is quite widespread. But you know, that risk still remains. And as we said before, you're just more vulnerable at home rather than the workplace, just because your capability through your router is just so much less. But again, if you're aware of that risk, you modify your behaviour and what you send accordingly.
Very good. So the poll has closed and the results are in. 85% of you believe that people are the biggest security weakness to your organization.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I think historically, and particularly coming from the cybersecurity industry, it was always about IT, it was always about technology. But actually, over the years, that's actually becoming a lot stronger. The IT providers, you know, the need to build strong systems and networks, that's where the money's been invested. But suddenly people are realizing now that actually people do silly things, people trust other people, and we're actually seeing the shift now go to the biggest risk now lying with people's interaction with technology rather than the technology itself, for sure.
Great. So onto the last slide then, Richard, and we'll open up for the rest of the questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because one of the things that I did, you know, I used to have the same password on an awful lot of my accounts, only because I couldn't remember the password, and that's a dreadful thing to say. And this was a few years back, but of course that was, you know, the reason you did that was because it was easy to remember. But of course that in itself is a great weakness, because, you know, if I'm on the dark web and I'm able to get a login, which is quite often an email address. If I can get just one of your passwords, I will try every other account to also try and replicate that. And that's just a human weakness. That is just, you know, that we can't remember or can't have a different password for every account. So that's the end of my 20 minutes. I hope you've enjoyed that. That was very, very fast, and it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour there. What I'll do though is I'll pass you back to Nick now, and obviously we'll answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, we've got a couple more to answer here. So due to COVID-19, do you think fraudsters have the ability to get away with more due to businesses being managed away from their business premises?
Absolutely, yes. That is without question, and we're already seeing the number of phishing attacks, the number of bogus emails, the sheer relentless nature of criminals exploiting people has just gone through the roof. Cybercrime is a faceless crime. You don't have to face your victim, and again, you know, it's a very heartless and cold crime because it's literally just pushing buttons and sending something out and then gathering the money and dealing with it when it comes back. But no, unfortunately, and it's very sad for me to say, criminals are exploiting this to the maximum moment.
Yeah, I have to add to that as well and say, you know, from our researchers that sit on a number of these criminal forums, you know, the chatter that they are hearing is all around the, you know, exploitation of the virus and boiler room activities. You know, they're getting hold of people's landlines and mobile phone numbers. And perpetrating, you know, quite ingenious frauds, pretending to be from the government or be from their financial institutions, and it's certainly spiking at the moment.
I mean, if I was a fraudster, now's definitely the good time to start up a business. You know, that's the irony of the situation. So what I've described today, if ever we were to set up a dark web business, you know, and we were at that disposition, now is definitely the right time to do it.
And just thinking about it too, I mean, if you know, a lot of people are unemployed or don't have jobs anymore, you know, they well turn to it. Okay, maybe the last question then. As identity moves to a digital identity, how do we prevent identity theft becoming a terminal issue? And where do we draw the line on surveillance versus a surveillance state?
Okay, so I can answer both of those. The first one is we're seeing more and more the use of biometrics being introduced. So the use of passwords, how do you actually identify the individual in front of you? More and more, we're going to end up at a biometric answer. So quite possibly your DNA, quite possibly something else. You know, they currently do fingerprints, you know, retina scannings, but I think ultimately it'll come down to some sort of way of analysing your DNA at the point of delivery, whatever that delivery might be. So I think that's where we're heading on that one. In terms of a surveillance state, I have quite strong views on this personally. So I'm not comfortable necessarily with the NSA, GCHQ not being accountable under the law as possibly as hard as they should be. You know, there are huge what's the word I'm looking for? I've got to be careful with my wording here, obviously, but there are huge opportunities for them to do lots of things under the guise of national security, and it's a question of who polices the police then. So for me, I think in the Western world, journalists and the like do keep the governments and the agencies to account. In some other countries, they simply don't, and you have to say that a lot of the digital stuff is being used to create effectively a police state by surveillance, albeit in some of them claiming to be democracies. So for me, there is a danger of that needs to be managed.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. I'm just going to pass back to Dickon now to close off the session as we're at the top of the hour. Thank you to the audience for a bunch of great questions. The ones that we haven't managed to answer, we will answer and post out onto the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Richard. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we have to draw time on this fascinating discussion for now. Certainly a lot to think about, and I hope it's valuable insight and tips for everyone on this call as well. Thank you also to all of our guests who joined us today, and to everyone who's taken part in our polls and asked so many brilliant questions. This is very much part of our wider exploration of the threats associated with the dark web that we're hosting in partnership with Acuris. So our members may continue this conversation on the Themis Senate, which is our online Q&A portal. Both Richard and Nick will be on this and ready to answer any further questions you may have over the next couple of weeks. So on your screen on the right-hand side, I think you'll see a section entitled Handouts, where you should see a number of resources that you can download, including information about this. Also, as a follow-up to this webinar, Acuris and Themis will soon be releasing a joint research paper, which will explore the threats of the dark web in more detail. And we'll be hosting an evening lecture with drinks later in the summer or whenever the lockdown is over. And if you're interested in attending that or any other thought leadership events, webinars, podcasts, or online learning, please do register your interest on our website, which is www.crime.financial, and we'll send you details nearer the time. I would also like to take this opportunity just to quickly thank our partners today. So Acuris Risk Intelligence is a global proprietary data vendor, helping customers better manage their financial crime, compliance risk, and regulatory obligations. They also, as we've heard, have a number of specific monitoring tools to help firms mitigate some of the risks that we have discussed today. And as a trusted partner of ours, I would urge all of our Themis members to look at how you can use Acuris' specialist data sets and tools to enhance your financial crime controls. If anyone would like any additional information about any of that, please don't hesitate to let us know. A final thanks to our speaker today, one of the world's leading experts in the field. We've been very lucky to have you with us today, Richard. I thought it was a fascinating expose of the dark web, in particular, how easy it is for criminals to set up illicit businesses using our data and profiles, which is scary stuff. I think if I was ever tempted to look on the dark web before, I definitely won't be doing that now. Richard has very kindly offered a free copy of his best-selling book, Cyberstrike London, to all of our guests today who would like one. So just let us know after the webinar. It's a fast-paced thriller focused on cybercrime and warfare, and a perfect read during lockdown. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has been a thought-provoking and interesting webinar. Please do let us know if we can help you in any way post this discussion. But otherwise, in the meantime, stay safe and well, and thank you again for your time. Goodbye.